Good evening, everybody. Tonight is November 19th, 2019. We're continuing Hilchos Bris Milah. It's volume 2 in Server Rabbanon, page 278. Just want to remind everybody that a person may be a sandik multiple times. The only question is whether the same father may honor him with being the sandik for the bris of his children multiple times. Though with regard to this, many communities' custom is to be lenient, especially regarding relatives or rabbinic figures. So in general, we learned last week that usually you will only serve as a sandik once for each family, but you can be lenient. What should one do if one's father is not Shabbos observant, but asks to be the sandik? So the Yalkut Yosef, that's the son of Rav Ovadia, addresses this question. Bal Tshuva, she'aviv machalo Shabbos befarhesia. Father does not keep Shabbos publicly. Uvakesh lasheves sandik. He asks his son, who's just had a son, he wants to be the sandik. Eitzel anechet for his grandson. Afal pisha meikar halacha ein iser litin leishev sandik. He says there's no halachic prohibition. In fact, if the act of asking him to serve the sandik might cause him to be a choser b'tshuva mikol makom, so mikol makom says nachon v'roi, it's still better, more appropriate. Shaben yasa kol l'shachnes aviv beli shdiyamachlok, is that the father should the father of the child should convince his father, the grandfather, without creating machlokes. That it's important to bring like a Rosh Hashiva, somebody who's a Godel B'Torah, v'chabed esaviv b'amida lebrachos. And instead, the father could hold the baby when they make the brachos of naming the child. That the sandik, through his actions, influences the child for kedusha, tahar, yiras Hashem, holiness. If a secular, non-religious person would sit as a sandik, yashper hashpa lo tova ala rachanimo. Says the Yalkut Yosef, there would be a bad hashpa. V'lachein, av shemeikra alocha ein b'zeh iser, yesh lasos kol hashtadlus limno azos b'darchenom. You should try to avoid it in a pleasant way. What about an unmarried man, a bachur? Can he serve as a sandik? So the Ben Ish Chai, a very famous Sephardi posek in the 1800s from Iraq, says that technically there's no problem with a single person being a sandik, but in general it's not the minig. Val sheilach ronash sha'atim abachur mutar liyo sandik ki b'simen reish samech hey lo nizkar b'zemeniya el rak li'isha. Hi, Sydney. Do you need you don't have your volume 2?
I didn't know we were doing volume 2 until 5 minutes ago. Here. I'm looking at it.
So even though in the Siman and Shulchan Aruch that we're talking about the sandik now, that it doesn't say an unmarried person, but rakli isha. There's a mania that a woman cannot serve as a sandik. That for an unmarried person, the Ben Ish Chai and the Shut Rav Palim says it's permitted. Ein monino so im yirtzeh. And we don't prevent him. Ki ma hefresh yesh ben bachur lenosui. What's the difference between if he's unmarried or married? Rak isha, he says yesh benyam bezeh mishum pritzus. Some kind of tznius problem if the woman sits as the sandik. V'od yesh tam acher hoyel v'asandik choshev kemaktir toiris. Like we said, that it's very special to be the sandik. It's a school of ashirus because there's a connection to Ketores, and just like over there by a Kohanim, there was a lottery. You could only do that once in your life. So that's why there's this concept that the sandik is also just once per family. Other places in the Zohar it says not that you're maktir Ketores, but that you're maktir an ola. Because an isha is not shaykh to the avoda. he says there's no svara to exclude a bochur, meaning an unmarried person. But we call malkom, aval b'shein k'peda b'zel kol zel lo nagu alam lazos mitzvah bochur. Some of the minig of the world is not to choose unmarried men. Mipnei ki haderech im avia ben hu atzmo en a yoshev sandik. So if the father himself is not going to sit as the sandik, elam achabed acherim, he's usually going to give the honor to somebody else. You know, machabed lodem gadol. It's usually an important person, lo bocher. Gama bocher atzmo al arov mizbayish li sandik. In fact, the bocher might, in the presence of all these important people, would be embarrassed to serve as a son. Lachein lo shchir zeh v'lo ein achanami in his daven kach ein lamono. Says the Ben Ish Chai that if it happens, you don't have to prevent
It's
it.
interesting, there hasn't been a women's lib movement for Sunday class.
Also,
They can work
he
out.
clearly calls it a bochor,
It
but
is right.
so unmarried man is inappropriate translation of a bochor.
No,
No,
bocher
but it's a
means
young man.
unmarried. In halachic terms,
But you can have somebody who's an adam gadol, a chashiv and gadol,
Who's unmarried.
Who's unmarried.
Yes, kosher
Does
women.
that you can still call him a bocher? He's learned. He's of a.
no, but he would be called the Talmid Chacham.
Yeah.
Oh, good, yeah, yeah.
That's what I was.
Oh, good.
But technically, the antonym of nosui is bochur.
True.
Right?
Is it?
Yeah, like a single person.
There is no other word for
Yeah.
Hebrew.
Ravak
Nati, is there a revak?
is a master.
Revak.
Ravakah is bachelorette.
Okay. The custom is that the sandik wears a talis during the bris,
But,
as known by the Pischei Tshuva. Sandik v'nohagim l'satev betalis.
and then single is.
We'll see soon about tefillin. That's going to come too.
What is it called? Rosh? If somebody's married and then divorced, and then he's single, he's not a Ravak anymore.
And if he lost his wife, which he
Alman.
even if he's single, he's
Ravak is
he's
if he was married.
So that he's a widower, an alman. Page 280. We will now briefly review the order of the bris, of the actual ceremony. So before the bris, some have the custom to wash the baby. It's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah. It says, Bisman Chachmei Gemara, in the times of Chazal, Im lo hayu rochtzim es avlad lifnei mila, lachar mila, v'yom shlishi lemila, ma'im chai ma'im sukkah. They understood that if the baby was not washed prior to the Mila and after the Mila and on the third day, it was a danger. Lefichach niskaku lichtov mishpato k'shachal yos b'Shabbos. That's why there's a whole discussion. What did he do about rachitza if the bris took place on Shabbos? However, says the Shulchan Aruch, remember he's writing in the year about 1500 in Tzfat. V'ayidna lo noagu b'rachitza klal. Today we don't do any rachitza. V'dino l'rchotz b'Shabbos imrotzu k'din rachitzas kol adam. It's somebody. There's no chiyuv. There's no special sakana whether you do wash, you don't wash. Says the Maran Shulchan Aruch. But the Haggah, the Ramah in Poland, Krakow, maybe 100 years later, 60 years later, said, Uvemdinos elu, in Europe, noagim l'rachzo lifnei amila, b'chamin shehuchmu me'esmo. He says you're not allowed to heat up the water today on Shabbos. It has to be done from before. L'achar amila b'motzei Shabbos. So it's not dochas Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah there, Dinos Elu, right? He's commenting on the statement of the Ramah. Kloi Mar, Dimim Komosenu, in our areas, Avkein Avlad Mesukin Kolkach Kamo B'Meyem, even because the Shulchan Aruch said in the Zman of Chazal, in the time of the Kamora, there was some kind of sakon if they didn't wash the baby. So the Ramah's comment, and in L'chora, the Ramah said Enogim, in L'chora there's no sakon anymore. If there was a sakana, the Ramah would have said you're allowed to do it on Shabbos as well.
I think it
So
would be more dangerous to wash the baby than not to wash the baby. But they're saying here, don't wash it. In other words, it's better if you don't wash the baby before the.
That's clearly what he
The
said.
Shulchan
No,
Aruch
but
said,
here it says no, even though
In the
it
time of the
comes in much.
Shulchan Aruch.
the Shulchan Aruch said in the times of Chazal, in the times of Gemara, the minig was to wash, and they felt without washing the baby before and after, it was dangerous for the child.
Right.
Then the Ramah in 1600 said, today there is a minig to wash, And no, the Shulchan Aruch then said, but in our time, he lived in Israel, in Tzfat, we don't have, there's no sakana anymore, and you don't have to do washing. Said the Ramah in Krakow, no, we do have in our Medinos, in Ashkenaz, in Europe, they did wash the babies. So now the Mishnah Brura, writing in 1933,
Europe.
right, but it's 300 years later, so it's always nice to keep those in mind. Says the Mishnah Brura, so he's explaining the Ramah basically, that even though there isn't such a danger like it was in the time of Chazal, says the Mishnah Brura, explaining the Ramah, that there's a tzorech to wash. So you should wash. You should wash. But you can't do it on Shabbos, heating the water. Okay. There are many customs as to the content and the order of the tefillos and brachos recited at the bris milah. The Gemara in Shabbos 137 states that there are two brachos recited at bris. So the brachos comes from the Gemara. The first one is a standard birchas mitzvah, like Asher Kiddush Mitzvah Tzanu Al Natilas Lulav, Al Tkiyah Shoifar, right? A bracha recited prior to performing a mitzvah, which is recited by the Moel. Asher Kiddush Mitzvah Tzanu Al Amila. The second bracha is recited by the father. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher Kiddush Mitzvah Tzanu Lachniso Bevriso Shel Avram Avinu. Now the Rishonim debate when is the correct time for the father to recite the second bracha of Lachniso. The Rashba cited in Tosfos. So look at the footnote. Many versions of Tosfos maintain that the correct version of the text is the Rashbam rather than Rashba. The Rashba lived in Barcelona in like 1360. The Balei Tosfos were not alive anymore, right? The Rashbam was the grandson of Rashi. Rashi lived in late 1100, 1100. And the Balei Tosfos, that whole period closed 1250. So they think there's a Girsa mistake. It should say the Rashbam, but the Rishonim say the Rashba. So the Rashba holds that this should be recited before the actual circumcision, like every mitzvah, oiver lasiyosim. Mitzvah brachas have to be brachas. Certainly, brachas on mitzvah are always done prior to the performance of the mitzvah. So l'chora, the Rashba and Tosfos seems to be suggesting that the mitzvah of lachniso is a bracha that seems to be connected to the mitzvah. That's why he's makbid that it should be done before. Before the milah is done. Rabbeinu Tam, on the other hand, holds that it should be recited after the circumcision, as we are worried that the Moel will change his mind and not perform the circumcision. So he'll be a bracha levatala. So he should do it after the bris is done. Although the language of
Because
Lachniso,
the father has to make it, not the mother himself.
well, the Moel makes the alamila,
Yeah, but I'm saying
and then the
it's-
father.
it's somebody else's.
Yeah.
So although the language of
Rather
again,
rely on someone
we're
else.
still in we're building here.
I guess.
Keep reading on.
Yeah, we're building. This is how it's step by step. Although the language of Lachniso to bring him into the covenant is in the future tense. Lachniso, we're going to bring him in, indicating that the Brit was not yet performed at the time of the bracha. So l'chor for Rabbeinu Tam, it's hard. How can he say it afterwards if the lashon implies that it's going to be in the future? He explains that the purpose of the bracha is a birchas hashvach, that one has merited to bring his son into the covenant of circumcision. So he says it's not a birchas mitzvah at all. And the reason that it was instituted, recited after the circumcision, is to show that one has circumcised his son for the sake of the mitzvah, not for health reasons. Says the Tosfos, Bilva'er, which refers to the bracha of Bir Chametz, Kulam lo pligi de lahabo mashma. That means it's coming up. We're going to do it soon. Similar, the Rashba should have made the lachniso before. If he says it after, the language of lachniso he's going to be lying in the bracha. The word lachniso implies that it's going to take place soon, not after. V'od, another problem, shetzarich levarach over lasiyaso. Okay. V'lo nir Rabbeinu Tam. But all of this doesn't make sense for Rabbeinu Tam. The Perkov Yezer Demila Tanya Hamal Oimed, the one who does the circumcision says, Ashek Hashem Yisrael Alamila, Avia Ben Oimer Lachniso, Mashma La'achar Hamila Mekomo. Rabbeinu Tam seems to be learning from the Gemara that the Moel's bracha is before and the father's bracha is after. It means afal gav de lachniso mashma laba. And even though the Rabbeinu Tam recognizes that the language of lachnisos is a language of lahaba, so how can you say it afterwards? Lo kasha. Delo zos anasa ashad mevarech. He's not saying the bracha right. Ela mishabeach umoy lekadosh baruch hu shetzivara lamila kishetov liyodo. It's a bracha, so it doesn't have to be said before. V'tiknuan, and they were masakin this bracha kan legalois ulodia shezu amila nas l'shem yotzro, and it's done right after the milah to show that this milah was done because Hashem commanded it. V'lo l'shem avodah zara. The Lolashem Murna. Murna is a worm that used to, I guess, burrow into the foreskin, and they would do mila to heal from the Murna. The Lolashem Har Grizim, which is another type of Avodah Zarah. So that's why he says it right now. You know why I did the mila? Lachnisu b'vrisa shalav ravina.
If it's Birkat HaShevach, Birkat HaShevach, it's also, we do on Hanukkah, Shas Nisan Noten, it's also Birkat HaShevach.
Right, that's correct.
We do it before.
But you notice, like I said, my minig is I say Asher Kedushan Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah, and then I start lighting. I don't say all three.
So you do the Shevach after.
Yeah, l'chora.
I saw a minig like that, but I don't know.
And maybe that resolves that. Maybe that's because I think they say that's what you should start lighting immediately after the Lahadlik Ner, because that's the Birchas HaMitzvah. And then the other ones are not necessarily so, right? So you can, and the Shechianu certainly, right? So I always say those, you have a minig where you say all three before you light one candle? Think about it.
Two and then
What is your
then
minig?
you light
All the
it.
brachas, then you start lighting.
Yeah.
Two and then the Shechianu.
As soon as you
I
finish the
saw
last
And
two.
then as soon as you start Hanir
Does-
Salom.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
I'm wondering if it's maybe because of that.
Did we,
you know,
okay.
And there was
Can't
Halal,
start
so
singing
that's what you're
Yom
lighting.
Shalom until they're lit.
Oh, and Hanami. No, but I'm asking, he's talking about the brachas.
I understand, I'm
Okay.
saying that after all the brachas.
It may have to do with this Birchas HaShvach thing. That's why they say start lighting, and then you can say it out. Okay. V'lo l'shem har grizim etzarech levarach oiver lasiyaso el b'makom she'oisa mitzvah levarach aval k'shevarach acher lo. When somebody else makes it, that's why he can say that afterwards. Okay, so it seems to be that we have one that says it has to be done before, one says it has to be done after. The Rosh, right, we had the Rashba, we had the Rebbeinu Tam. The Rosh suggests a compromise approach. According to the Rosh, the father should recite the second bracha after the Moel recites his bracha, and has already begun the actual Milah, but before the Priya occurs. Remember, there's a chaticha, the foreskin is cut, and then the foreskin has to be rolled back to reveal the glands. Because just because you've cut the foreskin is still covering the glands. It has to be pushed back. That's the Priya. So there's chaticha and then Priya, and then the mitzitza.
No,
So he
but
has to sing
I was
along?
thinking the other day, did he pull it back?
Say again?
So we pull it back.
Yes.
Yeah, they
Yes,
go back.
he pulls it back. Of course, that's if it's not done, it's not a kosher bris.
So far we have two opinions.
No, the Rosh is now the third opinion. He says you do it also. You do it before the milah is finished. Since the priya is part of the milah, he says it before the priya is done. This would still be considered reciting the bracha before the performance of the
How do
mitzvah.
we do it now?
We do it. Okay, we'll see in a minute. We'll see. As the priya has not yet been done, and a circumcision done without priya is invalid. Says the Rosh, Od shamati kshavia ben mevarch miyad acher birchas hamoel, mikri shapir, oiver lasios, still oiver lasios, and still fulfilling this dictum that this bracha should be done before milah, v'gam laba, and it lachniso, this language that it infers future, lafi shadayin lo pora. The moel didn't do the priya yet. Utnan mal v'loy pora ki ilu lo mal. Cutting without doing the priya, there's no meal at all. Now, so Gerard asks, how do we pass? The third approach of the Rosh is the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch here also details the order of events as the ceremony continues. Hamal, says the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Samachei, Asher Kashem Mitzvot Tzivenu Ala Milah. Vavi Aven Mevarech, he says, Bein Chaticha Sa'or L'Priya. Who's he saying like? Like the Rosh, right? So we've learned three opinions. The Shulchan Aruch is always like this. That means there's the Rambam, there's Rashi, there's the Rashba, and the Shulchan Aruch always will choose, and so that the tour goes into great detail as to all the Shittas HaRishonim. That's why it's very important when learning Shulchan Aruch, proceed tour, see what the Shittas are. Then when you learn the Shulchan Aruch, you will see who he's going like. Many times the Ramah is arguing because he'll hold like one of the other Rishonim. So the argument between the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch isn't necessarily between them, it's because they're relying on different Rishonim. They're not always like that, but
Here, about Chanukah, so the Rama said, Milel Rishon Va'elach Mevorach Shtayim Le'adlik V'Shalos HaNisim, Hagah Ve'Vorach Kol HaBroches Kodem She'yatchil Le'adlik.
there
That's
you
the
go.
Rama.
Okay.
And then Masechet Sofrim said, Ketzad Mevorchim, Bayom HaRishon Mevorach Sholosh, Vo'emer Anero Salolu, Vo'emer Shalos HaNisim La'avoiseinu. So, Masechet Sofrim, it sounds like Shalos HaNisim you say after the Adloko. So the Briskerov said, the Chaim Brisk said that you have to light the first candle and then say while you're lighting the other candle, you're saying the.
Tashas Nisim.
So it's a whole discussion about
Correct.
that because it's
Correct.
Birkas HaShevach. If it's Birkas HaShevach, it's
It
supposed to be
Did
after.
after,
not-
exactly. That's why I have that minig, and maybe my Rebbeim must have taught me that or something.
It's a Chaim Brisk.
Okay, there you go. So says the Ramah here. No, it's very nice because we make a tzushtel between this. The Tzurva didn't do it. They compared it to the Bir Chometz, but here it's similar to the what's going on in Chanukah. Says the Ramah here. Yesh oimrim shekol ha'am shemetz lamila yamdu shenemar vayamod kol ha'am babris. So first of all, the din of standing. So the Ramah says everyone needs to stand because he quotes a pasuk that the am that was present at the bris stand. V'chein noagin. Milvada toifas anar, shu yoshev, except for the sandik, who sits. The bacher moim dimsham oimrim. Then the Ramah says that the people standing there say, "Kashem shechnisu lebris, kein tachniseu letorav lachupa lamasim toivim." And we'll see. That's not our language. We say kashem shenichnas lebris. We'll see how that changed. Vavia ben o amoyel o echad me'am mevarech al hakos boy priagofen. Right, that's the first bracha after. V'yesh doagim litol hadas biyado. Some hold on to a hadas. Umevarech aleh ulahariach, and make the bracha of lahariach psomim.
The Moil, the father,
He said avia ben o amoyel o echad me'am, that was given the covet to do, like what we
to
do.
hold we have that with the Hadas?
No, I've never seen that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's far than
This one. I do see by Barry Wise. I've been to Barry Friday night when he has
Yeah, before Kiddush.
before Kiddush. He has hadas.
That's a Chassidish thing.
Okay. So
I'd say the son.
the Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Mechlam Asher Kidash Yedid Mi Beten. That's bracha number 1. The Nohagim Kishemagil V'Damai Chayi. Now, by the way, we consider them 2 brachas because it says Yedid Mi Beten, and we end Yotzra Bris. Then we start a new bracha. Elokeinu Elokeinu Kayim Esayel Azel Avi V'Limo. Now, we may just divide, maybe because we don't say a new bracha there. So it's really only one bracha. Maybe the Elokeinu Elokeinu is a samach lechaverta, like when we say Yoitzer Or, and then we have other things that follow it. But we divide it in 2. We give it usually to 2 people, not always. Sometimes one person says both of those, but in general we have 2 kibudim. One Yedid Mi Beten, and one is Elokeinu Elokeinu. Okay, so it says, and it's in Elokeinu Elokeinu that there's B'Domayich V'Omer Lach B'Domayich Chayi, V'Omer Lach B'Domayich Chayi, V'Noisen Me'ayayin Be'etzbo B'Fi Atinuk. So there's I haven't seen. We always put some cotton wine and we give it to the child. The Ramah says we should put it in the child's mouth when we say B'Domayich Chayi.
Really?
He just said, "V'noagin kishemagia leb'Domayich Chayi, noisen ma'ayayin be'etzbo b'fi
We
atinuk."
thought it was anesthetic.
It's right, and yeah, make them sleep.
Hagah says the Ramah weiter, "Uchshamo mevarach bracha zu roichet tchila yodav upiv kedei sheyivarach b'nikiyas." When the moil makes that bracha, if he's the one who's doing it, he should wash his mouth out. Now, he doesn't give the reason, But Mistam is because he did Mitzitza B'Peh, and he wants to do it B'Nikiyas. But that's me saying that. I don't know what why else he would say he needs to wash his mouth out. Okay. However, despite the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, some poskim wrote, right, that in practice the custom accepted by Ashkenazim in certain parts of Eretz Yisrael, the Mitzvot Sfardim, is to recite the bracha of Lachniso before the circumcision, in accordance with the Rashbam, and one should be careful not to speak between the bracha and the milah. The ruling is mentioned by the Yalkut Yosef. Poshet Aminik B'Eretz Yisrael, Shemavarchim Birchas Lachniso B'Viso Shalom Ravino Kodim HaMilah. Neged Psak Maran HaShulchan Aruch. V'chein Roy Linog. Sheminag Ze Yisodoso B'Harei Kodesh. It's this old minig. V'chein minig Bavel V'Aratzos HaMizrach. And this was the minig in Babylonia and in the eastern countries, K'das Arif, Rambam, V'Goinim. V'lo mamtinin levarach bracha zu bein achituch l'priya. And we don't wait for him to do it between the chatich and the priya. Vein chilik b'zeh beinim ha'av ba'atzmo ha'moel lebein kashamoel u'shlechav. It makes no difference. Ela sheyesh la'asmiach brachos lachniso b'riso lebirchos al hamila. You got to say it right after. V'shelo yasiach avia ben b'birchos lachniso lebein hamila v'priya. Certainly the father, when he made that bracha, should not speak. Because when we call makom imsach enach choizer levarach, he doesn't have to. If he did speak, he doesn't have to repeat it. Okay. The poskim dispute. And by the way, when I see Weider or the Moelim here, they follow this psak. They have the both brachas are made before he makes the cut. Is the way I see.
You put a beginning of the cut.
That's the way I see it. They don't do this thing where they do it between the chatich and the priya. First of all, the minig that I see,
He tells the father to make the bracha right while he's cutting.
immediately after he did ala milah, and he cuts and he says, say it right away. So yeah, Echanami.
What do you mean? So what does he say? We do it right away
Yeah.
after the cut?
Because
No.
the sandik, the moel doesn't want to have any delay between when he makes the bracha. So in Chanam, I've seen this.
He
He
makes the
gives
bracha,
a father that thing. He says, "Say it, say it." After I do it, say it. So
As soon as I finish my bracha, he says.
exactly, that's what he says.
And then he starts cutting.
and
No, he's
already
cutting
cut.
he's
already.
already
He's already
cutting.
cutting.
So it could be that he's following the
cutting.
Morana Shulchan Aruch, because basically it's between the Chaticha and the Priya. By the way, notice this the next time you're at a bris. The moel also usually gives the knife to the father,
Yes.
and then the father hands it to him, which is
Sure.
part of the shlichus process. Okay.
He has to say loudly, Avia Ben. Avia Ben is standing here. Right. The moil has to say, Avia Ben is standing here by the thing. He has to say it loudly. It's in Shulchan Aruch too.
The poskim dispute whether the bracha of Shechianu is recited at a bris. What do we do?
Every bris?
Let's just talk about what. That's not our minute. We don't say Shechianu. So according to Shulchan Aruch, it is recited, while according to the Ramah, it's not. So by the Sfardim, many recite.
Do we follow the
multiple
Shulchan Aruch or
sons?
not?
No, we follow the Ramah because the Ramah wrote in Krakow, in Poland.
Okay.
So
Shulchan Aruch was
Sfardim follow Shulchan Aruch. Now we follow Shulchan Aruch. Ramah doesn't argue with Shulchan Aruch in every simon in Shulchan Aruch. So many times there's no argument with the Ramah. Where the Ramah argues, we follow the Ramah. So Keshav Atzma Moel es Beno, when the father is the Moel, hu mavarch Shechianu. V'im Moel hu Acher, yesh oimrim, yesh oimrim she'ein sham birchas Shechianu. So the Marana Shulchan Aruch says if the shaliach did it, don't say it. Ula Rambam, la'olam ha'av mavar Shechianu kol milo milo. Rambam says the Shechianu says it each time. The father. V'chei noagu b'chol malchus Eretz Yisrael v'Surya v'svivaseu malchus mitzvah.
Every child,
Every child.
every son.
Haga dinos elu Europe noagim shelo levarch shechianu. Afilu kishav atzmo mal beno, even when the father does it. Im lo shemal beno abachor shechayv lefadoso, mevarch shechianu b'shas mila, ve'enu mevarch b'shas pidyon. So the Ramah makes a chiluk and says, if this is your firstborn son, where there's going to be a pidyon aben, i.e., the father's not a Kohen, the father's not a Levi, the mother's not a Kohen, the mother's not a Levi. In each one of those cases, no pidyon aben, or C-section, or right. So, if it's your first child where there's going to be a Pidyon Ben, the Ramos says, and the father's doing the Milah, you do say Shechianu. And you don't say it by Pidyon. See, normally, it would be reserved for the Pidyon Ben. Aval keshepotrim Pidyon enu var Shechianu. Based on these opinions of Shulchan Aruch and Ramah, the common custom is that Sfardim generally recite Shechianu, in accordance with the opinion of the Rambam, cited by the Shulchan Aruch. Ashkenazim follow the Ramah and do not recite Shechianu and Bris. In Eretz Yisrael, though, most Ashkenazim do customarily recite Shechianu in deference to the practice recorded in the Shulchan Aruch that in Eretz Yisrael, nearby countries, the father always recites Shechianu. Remember, the Shulchan Aruch was called Moran de Eretz Yisrael. So he was called like the Mora de Asr of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, the Tzur of Rabbanan is telling us that Ashkenazim who live in Eretz Yisrael seem to follow even the Shulchan Aruch. It's unusual. Now, a number of reasons are given why we don't say Shechianu, including the fact that Brit is not considered a mitzvah that is performed mizman lizman. So let's say, gentlemen, we say Kiddush every year Pesach. It's a mitzvah that comes lizman lizman. It gets a Shechianu.
We know it.
Pidyon Ben is not something that goes mizman lizman. It happens once.
In
So
Bris,
you do say Shechianu or Pidyon Ben?
No.
you're talking
Forget about
Bris or
Pidyon Ben.
Pidyon
First,
Ben you do say.
yes. He says,
So why you do? Why you say it? It's
we'll
not
see.
from
The fact that a breast is not considered a mitzvah is performed mizman lizman. One. From time to time, in a set way, like other instances where Shechem is recited. So in a Chadam, his Pidyon Ben would be a kasha on this, because it's also only done once, yet we say Shechianu. Or the fact that the baby is in pain, which is the svar that I always understood, that we don't say Shechianu because the baby is crying.
You say
And Shechianu is not recited when the joy of the event is mitigated by distress. That's how always we learned why there was no Shechianu. I have to see in the siddur. Where-
What about Kisui Adam?
No, they don't.
No.
Because there's distress, because there's the cave of the shechita that you just did.
Too late.
He's not suffering.
Okay. What about wearing tefillin?
Would you say on twins, you would say two?
Two shechianos?
Two shechianos, but they do the same time?
He says, "I'll call mila v'mila."
That's a good question.
The Svardim it said, "I'll call mila
10
v'mila."
minutes apart.
I'll call mila v'mila. The poskim discuss whether there is any reason for the father of the baby to put on tefillin, specifically during the time of the bris. The Yalkut Yosef does not support this practice. Yesh noagim, shavia benu asandik, menichin tefillin b'shas hamila. V'yesh koru tagral minexes. Some oppose this. Shemarim zilzul ba'os bris. It's a zilzul ba'os bris. By wearing tefillin, which are also referred to os. What do you need an os tefillin for? You already have os of the bris, so it's mezalzel the bris.
Yes, mezuzah it's machlokes. The shach say that because it's not from zman to zman, so you don't.
Yeah, but then the kasha is pidyon ben.
That's what the shach said. I don't
No,
know.
no, but that's what mezuzah. But you and I, we have a kasha on pidyon ben.
Pidyon ben,
If it's based on mizman lizman,
yeah.
we have to look that up.
It should be.
But wait, we're going to have pidyon ben.
Oh, yeah?
Pidyon ben is coming. We may not reach it tonight.
What, in 30 days?
No. Okay. V'alkei nachon yoyser shelo laniach tefillin b'shas hamila v'sheva al taisa odif. V'chein ra'inu l'kama ga'onei olam shelo yom manichin tefillin b'es hamila. He saw many ga'onim didn't do it. Mikol makom hanoagim laniach tefillin b'es hamila ein la'arer al minhagam. Don't yell at that minig. It's a minig. Sheyesh lehem al ma sheyismachu b'shoifi. V'rosh chodesh. Ach at tefillas musaf nachon laminam lanichem b'es habris. I had this once, I think, by one of my brisim, of my grandchildren. It was Rosh Chodesh. So we take off our tefillin right before Musaf. So the shad, you put it back on, he says, definitely don't do it because of this issue. It means we're normally wearing our tefillin till Aleinu, so we keep it on.
And what about if it's in the
But
afternoon?
Rosh Chodesh, you
What
don't.
if it's
Because there you're
past
not
the-
putting it back on, you certainly
You
shouldn't.
can put on full on any time you want during the day,
That's
right?
right. You mean if a person.
No, so you would, so according to
In the
this, you
afternoon.
absolutely would not put tefillin, you already put your tefillin on this morning.
If a person
He's saying you
makes-
shouldn't put
no,
it
no.
on.
If a person makes a bris at 5 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
he doesn't wear talis and tefillin?
Well, the sandik wears a talis.
Sonic, well, yeah, maybe put a talis
The
on.
father of the baby.
He said the sandik puts the talis, didn't
Sandik
say
puts
anything
the
about the
talis
father.
on. Yeah.
Talk about the father.
You see them
He
passing
never-
the
he never
talis.
had
one
one.
Yeah.
First of all, the moil doesn't wear a talis.
I'm not talking about the
Yes,
mother.
he does.
The mother does wear a talis.
No.
No?
The other day, he
No.
was wearing and
The moil? The moil.
All we saw tonight is the sandik wears a
yes,
talis.
sir.
It drives you crazy, I'm not sure which way to go.
It says noyagim l'satef betalis, sandik.
But if the father says the brachas, so maybe.
The Hasidish will always.
Yeah,
wore
yeah. They
stuff.
put the when the when they hand the baby, they give the talis to each
Tell you
person.
where to
Yeah.
go.
Okay, so all the participants wear talesim. L'chor in our minig, but I haven't seen it in the Shulchan Aruch yet. The Tzorva didn't bring it.
There is a svara about pidyon, about not about pidyon, but about mezuzah and about tzitzis and tefillin that you say shechiyanu, even if because they are not from zman to zman, because you're buying something, you're acquiring something.
Yes, like a new suit.
So you can say that pidyon ben you're acquiring your son. So maybe that will answer.
Okay, maybe we will see it.
And I think only
So
one.
however,
Oh,
other Ashkenazim, the Otzar Abris, which we've quoted before, I have the Otzar Abris.
this is the one.
He's an Achron. He lived in the 20th century. It's a compendium, all sorts of halachos regarding bris. He has sandik, goes on for 5-6 pages. Who has kadima, great grandfather on the mother's side, the father's side. It goes. You have the amount of stuff that the Otzar Bris brings is crazy. Yesh omrim shabiyam mila ein lachlot tefillin ad achra mila. That's our minig. That if you're wearing tefillin, we don't take it off. V'yesh kosfu sheyesh lichlot tefillin kodem mila. He brings another sheet that says no, you should take them off. Then he brings v'yesh kosfu de mahalach betefillin mikodem lo yachlotz. That he shouldn't remove them if he's already wearing them, but he shouldn't have alachatchila laniach b'shvil amila lo yaniach.
Right, so
But if he
the
shows
person
up,
right after
he davened in a
Shabbos,
different
you
minute.
just leave it on.
Minute and showed up. You don't put it on. You just leave it on. V'yesh nogim shavi aver meniach tefillin de Rabbeinu Tam. How about that one? Did you see that?
Yeah.
That there's a
I saw
shita that the father should dafka put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. I don't know what the
We
svara
didn't
is.
find them.
What was Rabbeinu Tam's, he didn't discuss this.
No, there's two kinds of tefillin.
Yeah, but
Rashi
why
and Rabbeinu
that?
Tam. So he said daf for some reason dafka to put on Rabbeinu Tam
The
tefillin.
whole
Talk about
thing-
Mila, but he didn't talk about Pidyon.
The whole thing is
about,
because it's the same thing that you don't put tefillin on Shabbos or Chol Hamoed because you say that
Ois.
you put an ois. So here in the bris you say you put an ois now, so you
Ah.
kind of minimize by putting the tefillin.
You're minimizing this, right?
The
ois of the bris.
Yeah, that's a small for Shabbos. That's a small for
yeah.
and I guess that's a small for.
Yeah.
I know.
Now-
so that's the reason that it's not.
Now,
you know.
normally we don't read further iyun, but I'm going to change it for this issue because this is right. This is the most controversial issue. Page 290. The bris milah ceremony performed on every Jewish male includes a practice called mitzitza, drawing the blood out from the location of the milah. This practice is ancient, with roots in early sources. The last 200 to 300 years, there have been those who wish to alter the practice of mitzitza or eradicate it completely. So where does mitzitza come from? The origin of the practice of mitzitza can be found in the Talmud. The Gemara states, this is in Shabbos, that a moil who does not perform mitzitza is no longer allowed to perform bris. This is because the Gemara states, it is dangerous not to perform mitzitza, a practice that Chazal evidently thought had medical benefit. The Rambam in Hilchos Milah explains that the purpose of mitzitza is to draw the blood from the distant places, presumably to assist in the healing process. Think about it. The idea is to suck, to provide suction. So the concept is to bring blood flow
That's
into
like
the area.
bloodletting in ancient times. That's what he's. That's
This
what he's
Galenic,
talking about.
we
Right.
always
They think
spoke
it
about
is.
that, that's the theory
So they want to bring
for the humors.
white blood cell, they want to
Yeah.
bring healing material into the area. Okay. Indeed, we're on page 290, Walter. Indeed,
There is any medical benefit of drawing blood into the wound?
well, a wound heals because the body, remember opsonization, remember bacteriology? There are chemotactic factors that draw things to like white cells. The inflammation begins in an area and things are drawn, platelets, things. So we form a scab. That's because things are drawn to that area. Now,
So he's
huh?
asking again.
Clots,
clotting.
So does
everything.
mitzitza help heal the wound?
No, yeah, forget
I mean,
about
that's
forget
assuming
about
a
the-
snake
No, he asked
It
me
would
about.
heal just as-
He's
First,
explaining it from the point of view of
I would say that
physiology.
blood is going to flow there anyways.
Anyway.
So this is expedited?
It perhaps hastens it. Okay, let's see.
So there is something about that. It's not,
It's a stretch.
forget about that.
On the other hand, you're opening yourself up for an infection.
No, yeah, so
You're
forget
adding
about
what-
it.
You have to always have to
I'm not
weigh,
saying-
you have to
I'm not
weigh
saying
risks and benefits, pros and cons,
At that time, they didn't realize there were bacteria in the mouth that could make it worse.
correct?
Yeah.
So they didn't know that.
Let's see,
Okay.
let's see. Presumably to assist, indeed,
Health expert.
this is considered to be so critical
And
that the
he's other
Gemara
expert.
rules that even though there's chilul Shabbos when sucking the blood on Shabbos, it's nevertheless required.
Part of it.
What's the chilul?
It's part of the bris.
Sucking is,
There's nothing against it, it's part of the bris.
I don't know what's.
Sucking on it.
I'm not sure what the Av Malacha is by sucking unless it's from schita.
it's like a,
Maybe
suck-
like
like a
squeezing.
sponge.
Poison.
Like a
It's like
sponge.
sucking a snake bite. They tell you.
I know, but
suck
so
your
what
snake
malacha
bite,
were you
suck
being
the
over?
blood- suck
I'm
the
not sure
poison
yet.
out.
Anyways, this halacha is brought by the major poskim that you have to do mitzitza, and has become a normative part of the bris milah. Now, if you don't do mitzitza, is that ma'akev the milah? Does that say that the milah is puzzle? Concerning any mitzvah, if something integral is missing in the performance of that mitzvah, the mitzvah is not considered to have been performed. That's called ma'akev, where the action wasn't performed, it wasn't performed correctly. So it's holding back the proper performance of the mitzvah. In the case of bris, there are three major steps. Cutting of the outer foreskin, that's the milah. Tearing and peeling back of the inner foreskin. I explained that there is a, if this is the glans penis, so the skin, the extra foreskin goes distal to it, and the skin comes back, and then there's a little mucous membrane that covers the glands. So when you cut it, you actually tear. That's why Rabbi Loaf, I don't know if you know, he had these sharp fingernails. He would tear using the Satmar minig is rather than to use a clamp, they use their fingernails to actually tear that foreskin, tear that outer skin on the glands, and then they peel back the foreskin to reveal the glands. If you don't do that, you have tzitzim ma'akvin. Tzitzim are fragments of skin that cover the glands, and if the corona, right, the corona, the round atara, is not completely revealed, and there's skin overlying it, it makes the milah not kosher. I, as a urologist, have had to do many revision circumcisions where there are skin bridges between the shaft and the glands. You have to cut through them and all that. So that happens after that happens after goyish circumcisions as well. It's not just milah where it occurs after milah as well. We have to do revision circumcisions. But the act of priya
Like the
folds it
Weeder-
back and folds
He
it.
goes,
Does Weeder ever have something like that?
he goes and cleans
Weeder
up.
does priya too.
No,
Yeah.
does he ever have tzitzit?
Afterwards?
Every
Yeah.
every moil will have that.
This will snip and make it.
It can happen. It's a risk. It's rare.
You have to go into the bathroom.
So,
to
you,
see him
but
do
the
that?
problem
I
is,
saw him.
if you
He was
cut,
taking pride in
I've
his
seen
work.
both cases where they cut too little, and then they need a revision circumcision a year later because there's skin covering the glands. That's extremely common. Why? Moyalim are very concerned of cutting too much skin off. Why? If you cut too much, I've seen cases where you need skin grafting, where the whole penile shaft skin's been cut, and you have to take from the thigh and you do a split thickness skin graft, and you have to, because too much skin's been removed. So because of that risk, they will take too little. Weeder takes just what you need to, that's the skill of the moil. You've got to take just the right amount, not too much, but not too little. Otherwise, you're going to have problems both ends. So far we have the second act is priya, and then you have the third, sucking of the blood. The first two steps are universally accepted to be ma'akev. There's no milah without cutting of the foreskin itself. And the Mishnah writes that if one circumcises without performing priya, it's as if he didn't perform the circumcision at all. There are no explicit sources on the issue of mitzitza's place in the ceremony of bris milah, other than the Gemara quoted above, which said that a moil who does not perform mitzitza, we take him out of his job. But it didn't say very clearly there that he didn't perform the bris. So there's been some discussion as whether or not the performance of mitzitza is makiv or not. The Ran, in his discussion of when the milah process is considered completed as regards the ability to make corrections to the foreskin on Shabbos, writes, Mistavra, the calls, meaning they're doing a meal on Shabbos, and all of a sudden, I've seen cases like that where during the circumcision, he sees a little tzitzit ma'akif, and he'll take a scissor and he'll cut some more skin. Because and that's what the Ran says. He's still doing the Mila, right? Remember, he hasn't separated. We're going to see regarding violating Shabbos, if he completed everything, like there's a shaila, can you go back and start working again? Because it's not this, it's Shabbos. Maybe you finished the Mila. So the Kos Manshum is asik b'tzorchei Mila gon chaticho priyosu mitzisoso. And you notice he used the word mitzitze as tzorchei Mila. Lo mikri pirish. He hasn't separated. The kulu tzorch Mila ninu. It's all part of the Mila. Aval im silek yodov achar mikan hainu pirish. Look, if he moved his hand and he's not working anymore, it's pirish. So aval bishadan sheyesh liten asplonis. Asplonis is a bandage. The kamun is like the they would put powder on it. The cholot ani tzarch refuninu vafilu b'mitzitza atzma yesh la'ayin the kol shapara harei sayim tzarchemila. So let's say the guy hadn't done mitzitza yet, and it's finished the priya, so the sayim tzarchemila. V'delma mitzitza mikri refu v'lo tzarchemila, and maybe it's a refu and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos v'tzarchiyun. What they're bringing this to show is that there's a chiluk between chaticha and priya, stop, and then mitzitza. Right? They don't say chaticha priya they must do. There's a shayla, maybe the mitzitza is only a refuah and not part of the ikr mila. That's what they're using the Ran for. And they're going to probably use the Ran to say that perhaps the mitzitza is not ma'akev. Right? It's logical that the entire time that one is involved in the performance of the mitzvah of mila, cutting the foreskin priya mitzitza, one is not considered to have finished the mitzvah. For all these steps are part of the mitzvah. However, if he has already completed those steps, it's considered as if he's finished the process, even though he has still to put on a bandage. For this is part of the medical portion of the milah and not the mitzvah. And even by mitzitza itself, it's unclear if it's part of the mitzvah. For as long as one performed the priya, it's considered that he finished the mitzvah. And maybe one could argue that mitzitza is considered part of the medical part of the milah, not part of the mitzvah. This is just the translation of what we just read, the Ran in Hebrew. That very important Ran. The Ran is therefore unsure of how to categorize mitzitza. Is it part of the mitzvah of milah and therefore ma'akev, or is it part of the medical part of milah and therefore not ma'akev?
Well, it's not ma'akev, it's a sakana, so it is because...
No, but ma'akev meaning, if you didn't do the mitzitza, is your milah invalid? That's what we're dealing with. We said chaticha priya avada, it's invalid. If you did chaticha and didn't do the priya,
What does the mitzitza do?
So we said the
That's-
Rambam
again,
says
what exactly does it do?
it's part of the medical procedure to allow the healing to occur better. It draws in blood from distant regions. So
So it's really not part of
the Stei Chemet comments on the Rambam that because of the way that the Rambam structured the halachic citation of this issue, it is clear that he considered mitzitz as being me'akev and part of the mitzvah itself. But the Orach Chaim argues in the Orach Chaim HaKadosh on Chumash in Vayikra argues that it's part of the mitzvah of Mila itself and brings that a pseudo-medical proof. He says that the outer and inner foreskin have corresponding blood within the genital organ. And until this blood is extracted through the process of mitzitza, one is not considered to finish the mitzvah. Additionally, in the traditional piyut, which Ashkenazi Jews recite during the benching at the bris, right, the harachmans, it says, "May the merciful one bless the one who circumcises the flesh of the foreskin and peel back the inner foreskin and suck the blood of the wound. The service of the faint-hearted would not be acceptable if he failed to perform these three actions."
Who wrote the Rachman?
No, that's the Rachmans.
Who made the
Well, it's from the year 500 to 1000, right? The Paitanim, the Kalir, and those piyutim could be written from the times of the Gemara. Some, like they say, Rabbi Eliezer, the Kalir was maybe from 200 from the times of the Gemara, but it's late.
Let me ask you something, and who gave them is it Aloha Mila Moshe Sinai, how we do the Mila? In other words, nobody, the Torah says you should
Cut and Priya.
Priya. But there's nobody who really came up with a...
Masara probably.
It has to be that there was. It doesn't. Nowhere has it said anything that's halach l'moshe messina yet. We haven't used that terminology.
Yoshua did the milah,
But you had the Mila by Moshe Rabbeinu
Right,
too.
right. And then by Mitzrayim, 600,000 people did
by
milah.
Yoshua bin Nun.
Okay, but there's been a change. Equipment has changed. Technology. They used to use a stone.
Priya, we
You know
learned
what I'm saying?
from Yoshua bin Nun, the Priya.
What did he
You
use?
learned from Yoshua
No, because
bin Nun.
because they didn't do
Shuv
priya.
Moed, because
They didn't do priya in the 40 years. It was
Yeah.
considered a sakana. They didn't do priya in the
So we
middle.
learned Priya from Yoshua.
Flint.
You didn't ask, what was it, answer for if he has to go back after he make it on Shabbos to make.
If he's still involved in the mitzvah of Mila, you're allowed to, you're still doing the Mila. Now, from here it is clear that the author of this piyut considered mitzitza to be an integral. However, the Chassam Sofer, in a letter to a student, writes, and further I say, that even if it was explicit in the Gemara that he should perform the mitzitza with his mouth, nevertheless, since this isn't part of the intrinsic mitzvah, but rather was instituted to avoid unnecessary danger to the baby, one who performed the Mila and Priya, but not the mitzitza, has already finished the mitzvah, and the baby is already permitted to eat truma and the korban pesach. Some Sofer says the mitzitza is not ma'akeh.
So if you have blood accumulation after he did a mitzvah, but he didn't do it correctly, there was still blood left in that area, whatever it is. You could go to a regular doctor and have get that removed,
Of course,
right?
of course,
So
like
it has
anything.
nothing to.
No, but see, the question is going to be soon like this: can the mitzitza be done through other mechanisms than oral suction?
You can't do through a.
Too strong.
through a glass.
Like they use the.
So that's
By
we're
pens.
building.
Yeah, by
First,
pens.
we've gotten some Sofer major ruling, who seems to suggest that the mitzitza is not the ikar part of the milah.
Or
Can we do
ceremonial.
the whole bris milah by robot?
Robot.
Robotics.
Who's going to make the bracha of ala milah?
Who's gonna put the towels?
The
IBM.
one that pressed the.
What's her name?
Why not? What would be the ma'akev
So
there?
why not
If at some point,
Why not to do mitzitza through a thing?
okay.
We
Let-
said issue
okay.
mishum chitzov. We said
Yes.
we do the whole thing. So
Okay, because they're going to see that maybe there's a Zohar that says there has something to do with peh. Let's build, right? We don't know much about mitzitza. That's why I think it's worth learning this.
we don't pass him according to the
Hold
Zohar.
on a
It's not.
second. What you're saying is not, the pasuk says that you have to do the brit, right? So you have to do the brit, right? It's mashma that it's a human being. You can't.
No, but he
change
means,
that.
but
No,
a
you can't.
robot always is under the control of a human being.
Yeah, no, but you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we use a robotic prostatectomy, we're operating.
Yeah,
It's
who
not the
gets
ro-
paid, you or the
It's not the
robot?
robot doing it. The robot is just a tool. Instead of a knife, the tool's going to be the robot. He's just saying he's using it.
What's gonna do a matzitza too?
Now, let's learn.
I'm coming from the Svara that bris milah, the mitzvah of the
Shame
father.
on you.
It's not a mitzvah to do it. It's a mitzvah of responsibility.
No, because Meikar Adin, we learned, you were here, we learned that a father who knows how to do the bris, there's a shaila whether he can give that away.
That's the shach. That's the shach.
Okay,
The other's opinion about that.
okay, so that's
The
shlichus.
kosher has a whole
No,
shiur that
no,
he
because
said-
of shlichus adam
But you
kamoso.
don't need shliach. It's a whole thing. It's a responsibility. The whole thing.
How kosher, what about a robot for chef, to chef it? Can a robot do chef?
Remember, the robot, if it's a knife that's going to be extended, instead of the human holding it,
Right.
the robot holds it. If it's a better thing, I'm not sure there's going to be a problem with that. It's still the human being doing it. A robot is not an independent, autonomous thing that's doing it on its own.
Through a button, pressing a
You're
button.
directing the robot.
Well,
No,
hang
you're
on.
not, you're not.
By shchita, it could be that it's not good because oimed al gabov, you have to do it. You can't press drisa. So there's different issues there that it may not be permitted that way.
I'm not so sure, no, Brit.
No, because by Brit there is no drisa, there is no.
No, but what about
As long it's a hechatimtza, how to get rid of the orla. It's not by shchita where there's a problem because if you do it with pressure, or you do it a certain thing, hagrama, you're going to ruin the shchita.
And can a robot
But
run a second
Ernie, there will be a you have to prepare
scroll around? Should be.
before you do the bread.
Before we get to the robot, let's learn about mitzitza.
Do you need any kavana?
Yes,
When you do the bridge,
Yes.
you need kavana.
yes.
So.
Robot has no kavana.
A robot is not an autonomous, not autonomous. You're talking about, like what Nati said, you
should
push a
ask
button, then
somebody
it cuts.
You should ask somebody this shaila.
I haven't answered the shaila yet.
I don't think a robot can make.
Write an email to Tzvika.
We're not there. We're not talking about robot. We're not talking about robot now. We're talking about we're talking about mitzitza bepeh.
The robots.
Do we have to do mitzitza bepeh or not? So we could ask the question: if according to the Chassam Sofer, the mitzitza isn't an intrinsic part of the mitzvah, but rather it's only to prevent danger to the baby. If modern science were to tell us that this isn't effective practice anymore, or was even dangerous to the baby because it's causing infection, what would be the halacha? Is there room in Jewish law to change a law when the understanding of the reason for it doesn't apply anymore? So let's leave it there. Let's leave, and we're going to continue in Mitzitza for,
That's a general
For-
question.
yes. There will be a lot of issues regarding that. That's a big yesod, and we will continue next week.